Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 320 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on why psychologists don't only deal with crazy people. And it is Sunday, the 27th of April 2025 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is a lot of fun because we're tackling one of the most classic psychology myths ever. And the reason why I think that this is really fun and quite interesting is because I remember a conversation with my brother's dad, because we've got different dads, probably about 2 years ago during the gender reveal party for my brother's child. And I was talking to him because he had an accident and he needed to go and see a psychologist. And he was talking to me about how nervous he was because he didn't want other people thinking he was crazy just because he needed to go and see a psychologist. So even today, and in this day and age, this is still a prevalent, very concerning myth that that some people believe that psychologists only see crazy people. So in today's podcast episode, we're going to learn why this myth develops, what's the truth behind it, and also how can we counter this myth a little bit more. So it's definitely an interesting podcast episode for sure. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is Insecurity widens the lightning gap. After meeting someone for the first time, we tend to underestimate how much they like us. The liking gap has turned up in research with children as young as 5, as well as adults, though the size of the gap varies wildly from person to person. Now, Hinshaw Tanner at the University of Toronto and colleagues have found hints as to why some people experience a bigger liking gap than others. Not only that, but in this latest work in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Personality Processes and Individual Differences, imagine trying to say that really quickly, like a tongue twister, identifies not just one type of liking gap, but 2. Okay, so the general takeaway from this article is that insecurity definitely increases the liking gap. And this is something that I definitely know from personal experience. Well, because as I've been working on my attachment style and I've been trying to move from my own attachment from disorganized to more secure attachment, insecurity definitely does play a role in it. When I'm more of an anxious attachment style, then I definitely think that, oh, how could that person possibly like me? I don't understand why that person would like me. But as I've been learning more about this week, because I've been really reflecting, because lots of stuff's changing, lots of people are leaving, I'm seeing people for the last time ever, essentially. I really am starting to realise that, oh yeah, so many people like me. And it's that interesting thing about the lightning gap, though, which is where you will meet someone for the first time. I think, oh yeah, like they're a lovely person, but I don't know if they like me that much. I don't know if I like them that much to be able to form a friendship with them. But lots of people do like you more than you think. So it's definitely food for thought, and I don't think that this is something that we need to be mindful of whenever we encounter like social interactions, like when we meet someone for the first time. And if we enjoy that positive interaction and then like we catch ourselves, going, oh no, like that person possibly couldn't, maybe we should just take a moment to think for ourselves and actually think, and actually reflect on the idea of the lightning gap though. And do we think that the person actually might not like us as much as we think because there's a valid reason? Or is this simply this lightning gap having an effect on us, especially if you have insecure attachments or if you're an insecure person naturally? Maybe just something to think about. So the second one is your work or insomnia. When stress hits us, sleep is often one of the most immediately affected areas. Difficulty falling asleep, frequent awakenings, or even distressing nightmares can all exacerbate stress further, forming a cycle and making it even harder to cope. As if struggling with sleep due to your own stress wasn't enough, new research suggests that sometimes our stress-induced sleep disturbances can spread to those closest to us as well. The paper in question, a study on workplace bullying by Alfredo and colleagues, finds that insomnia caused by workplace dysfunction doesn't just impact those bringing stress home from their jobs, it disrupts their partner's sleep too. So this week, something that I've actually been doing as a part of my outreach work is I've been going into colleges and I've been given about 3 different talks now about exam stress and how to cope up with it, and also some revision tips. And something that I did have to talk about, including some personal experience, was stress-induced sleep disturbances. So I definitely think that it's quite interesting that it can actually spread to like partners too, though. And this reminds me of systemic models of mental health. Because if there's a disruption to the family system, for example, if one person isn't sleeping very well, then it has a ricochet effect across the family system, or in this case, the relationship system though, because like if someone is like stressed from their job and they're bringing it home, then it's going to cause disturbances because they're going to be more stressed, they're going to be more irritated, more snappy, and generally not as pleasant to be around as normal. And if their sleep is also being disrupted, so they're tossing, they're turning, they just can't sleep, they're fidgeting, then because you're sharing a bed, then you're going to feel that. And that's just going to be highly irritating. That's going to wake you up more and impact your life too. So this is what I really like, more holistic approaches when it comes to mental health and its consequences. Consequences though. So the last one is, how much misconduct should there be in research? Open quote. That's a strange question. Of course, there should be no misconduct in research. The problem is that it's difficult to know exactly how misconduct, data fabrication, plagiarism, and so on there actually is. Instead, we have to infer this from the number of allegations that are made, the number of these that are held up following an investigation, and so on. In other words, our evidence is indirect, and that leads us to a question of how much misconduct there should be if no allegations are made or no allegations are upheld. Then this might be for 2 reasons. One is simply that there is misconduct. I'm not sure that that's plausible. Another is that misconduct isn't reported or properly investigated. That's more plausible. Close quote. Join Marcus as he weighs the evidence of how rare research misconduct might be over at the Psychologist this week. Personally, I think this is a very concerning article because I completely agree. In theory, there should be no research misconduct whatsoever. Absolutely not, because research should be done empirically, within integrity, and it's important that there is no misconduct, because otherwise this can decrease the credibility, but also trust in science, especially psychology, a discipline that's all very, very much under attack. And science as a whole, again, even more so for psychology, is still recovering from the replication crisis that happened a decade ago. So we need to be very careful about how our research is done, because we don't want yet another scandal. But equally, I think that it's ridiculous to imagine that there is no misconduct. Because human beings, we're cognitive misers, we do like to cut corners. So, and for example, yesterday I was actually having a conversation with a lecturer, and she was talking to me about all of the different AI submissions that she gets as a part of the essay assignments. So when there are tools and when there are ways to cheat, or cheat basically, and for there to be misconduct, then definitely people will do it. And something else that this lecturer also said yesterday was that when it's a complete AI submission, well, she definitely fails them. But when she can tell that half of it is done by AI, half of it isn't, then it's a bit more difficult. Because yes, it's definitely academic misconduct, but she can't fail. But she can't fail them because there is still some original work. So it's very interesting, and I definitely think that it's a fine balance in the real world, because theoretically, yeah, there should be no misconduct, but in the real world, there will be ways to cut corners, especially with artificial intelligence getting better week on week or day by day. So it's concerning. We've definitely got to think about it more, and I think that in lecture theatres, this does need to be spoken about, and this does need to be more an open discussion, that the students can see why academic misconduct is also really bad, but also that there's a massive grey area, and the grey area we should never get involved in. Well, involved in though, because it's a grey area in terms of some students won't see any problem using AI to do their work because they know the information and they can check it. But other people would say that's wrong completely. There's definitely a lot of ethical debates here that need to be had too. So I know that wasn't exactly what the article was about, but I still think that it's interesting food for thought for the future. So I hope you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. This week I've definitely got some tips for you. So yesterday I got home from the open day. As you know, I flat out love working open days. So I get to talk to other ambassadors, I get to hear gossip, I get to talk to lecturers. Most importantly, I get to talk to great potential students who want to study psychology, and I love that. I flat out think it's amazing that I get to talk to different psychology students. So one of the things I want to reflect on first of all is, there's about three things. So first of all, I want to reflect on how much people grow naturally over time, because um, last night I also found this job application to be a trainee educational mental health practitioner, and I was reading through it, and I was quite surprised that I hit all the job requirements. What's also quite good though was that I was thinking, wow, I never would have gone into education before. I never would have thought being a mental health practitioner or specialist in any sort of educational setting would interest me whatsoever a few months ago, let alone a year ago. But because I've been doing so much outreach work, I've been interacting with so many younger people and students and children for like the past 6 years, and I realise it's where I feel comfortable. I like making a difference. I like talking to younger people about their interests, about their passions, what gets them excited. It really does show how much you actually grow over time. And yesterday, this is about the third time that I've done this now. I was actually chairing the student panels because during our open days, there were two 15-minute student panels where parents can ask us questions and also so can the potential students. Students, they can ask us questions about psychology, the university life, and anything that they're concerned about. And I have to chair those talks now because I volunteer, and it does run a lot better. Better though, because it's the extra student in engagement, and ultimately that's what parents want to hear from, and so do potential students, people who are like them. And I was thinking when I got home yesterday and I was so exhausted, I just couldn't do anything because I've been slightly overworked myself and I had mild burnout because of revision, too much outreach work and everything. And I was just thinking to myself that I really have grown so much over the past 6 years because 6 years ago, the idea of doing a student panel in terms of actually chairing it, having to lead it and come up with questions to ask fellow ambassadors when there were no questions from parents and students, that would have filled me with dread. I would have had a panic. I would have probably had a slight meltdown. But I was able to handle it really well. Of course, I stuttered because that's just me when when I have to do public speaking, and I edit a good 99% of it out of this podcast episode when that does matter, when that does happen. But I definitely think that all of us today, if you do anything after listening to this podcast episode, just take a minute and think about how much you've grown, how amazing you are, and just be glad that you've developed those skills because you are amazing for doing everything that you do. And even if you're having a bad time, just practice some a gratitude because you have because the chances are you have likely grown, you likely have developed skills, and there are good things about your life. And believe me, I know sometimes it's really hard to find the positives, especially on the really rough days though. But practicing a gratitude actually really does benefit your mental health, and it does make you feel great afterwards. So the second thing that I wanted to mention was that moment when you realize everything's changing in your life. Because this week I've been doing lots of outreach work, like I said, but also two people have left from the recruitment team. The two main people who I contact for psychology recruitment work as a part of the open days and the offer holder days, which was definitely quite shocking because I've known these people for so long, and the other ambassadors that I work with, I had a photo with a friend actually yesterday, even though I've actually got to open the message that actually has the photo because as soon as I got home yesterday, I was like, I want to be a hermit. I don't want to talk to anyone. Yeah, so everything changes and everyone moves on. Because I really am at the end of my university journey now, and that is really nerve-wracking, and I'm nervous about it though, because I love for my life, and I'm nervous about the future. But it's also exciting. So that's just something to think about, and definitely never dwell on the future because of stuff like that changing. But it's not a bad thing to appreciate it or get excited or just acknowledge that you're feeling a bit negative or you're feeling a bit uncertain, because of everything changing. Changing though, never suppress your emotions. And finally, I just want to say please make sure that you take breaks and that you do practice a bit of self care though. Even though on my author Facebook posts and my different fiction author accounts, I do have a self care Sunday. And this week, even though I was loving everything, like I was doing these talks, I saw my counsellor, I spent time with my family over Easter. I spent 6 hours at the open day yesterday. I was doing a lot of psychology revision, psychology writing, X, Y, and Z. I slightly didn't realise I'd burned myself out, mildly. And I was thinking, oh, why am I burnt out? Because that's weird. Normally I'm burnt out because I've done way too much outreach, which I had to some extent, but I realised, oh, I need social rest. I've been peopling way too much. I've been having to be extremely social, basically 24/7 for ages. And I'm like, oh yes, I actually need to recharge my social battery. So please just monitor yourself. Make sure that you're okay. So last night I just had dinner. I watched a bunch of stuff on a telly, and I did nothing really. I just could not be asked, and I did not have the energy to do much. But that's okay. Sometimes you were just needed. But please give yourself permission to rest. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And please, send pictures of where you're listening in from. I always love to see where all of you are from all over the world. And today's episode has been sponsored by my brand new book, Myths About Clinical Psychology. So, by the end of this book, you're going to be able to understand a lot of different myths about psychology in terms of why psychology is a science, about what a clinical psychologist actually do, how therapy actually does work, and also, but there were about 5 different myths that surrounded why people shouldn't become a psychologist, when in reality they really should be, and the things that people think are barriers to becoming a psychologist aren't actual barriers in reality. So it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. It really goes into a lot of the depth about where these myths come from, what's the truth of these myths, and this book is perfect in that case you want to ever work in clinical psychology and mental health related fields. It's a lot of fun and you're definitely going to get a lot out of it. So there's Myths About Clinical Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers. You can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore, or local library if you request it. And in the next few weeks, I'm hoping to get the AI audiobook out at selected audiobook retailers like Kobo, Spotify, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems like Baker & Taylor, Biblioteca, and Overdrive. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. Also, by becoming a patron of the show, you get access to over 60 exclusive blog posts, which won't be turned into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years. So if you want access to tons of great exclusive psychology knowledge, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Also, if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about why psychologists do not only deal with crazy people. This is a great episode. I really enjoyed it. So let's dive into it. And this is an extract from my book, Myths About Clinical Psychology. If there was any psychology myth that is going to get me on my soapbox, then it is definitely going to be this myth, because there was so much to unpack, and I'm actually really excited about this chapter. Therefore, in this myth chapter, we're going to be focusing on the stupid idea that psychologists only deal with so-called crazy people. This is going to be a lot of fun. Little recap. So the main reason why this myth is automatically wrong is because it's built on the idea that only mental health professionals and clinical psychologists are psychologists. Also, this myth completely forgets that there are other types of psychologists. For example, business psychologists, social psychologists, experimental psychologists, academic psychologists, and on and on and on. Therefore, even if this myth was true and psychologists only saw crazy people, I absolutely hate saying that, then it would just be impractical for psychology to only see crazy people. For example, you might be able to argue that a social psychologist and an academic psychologist might meet with a crazy person for academic research, but I would have no idea and no explanation as to why a business psychologist would want to work with a crazy person, because business psychologists only really work in HR departments. Therefore, this myth is just unpractical from a practicality standpoint and how the psychology job market actually works. What even are crazy people? Now then, if we jump on my soapbox for a moment, what are crazy people? I have no idea what crazy people actually are, because it just comes back to this myth in general society that crazy people like murderers, psychopaths, evil abusers, paedophiles have mental health difficulties. It is one of the most disgusting myths ever, and if you have a mental health difficulty, then you're a crazy person, you're dangerous, you're insecure, you're unstable, you're going to hurt, or you're going to kill someone. That's the myth. So that is just absolute rubbish. I absolutely hate this myth because it is so dangerous, disgusting, and these people just need to learn what psychology actually involves. And even if someone was apparently crazy in terms of being psychotic, for example, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they don't deserve support. It doesn't mean that they deserve any less help than anyone else. Because people with psychosis can live a good lives. They can receive mental health support, and they can do good things with their lives if given the right mental health support and treatment. The very idea that just because someone's crazy according to this horrible societal myth, and the idea about what a bad person looks like, is just horrific. Because even a psychotic person deserves good treatment, good support, and to live a good life. I just absolutely hate this myth that says certain people, just because they have certain health conditions, are lesser or dangerous or they're evil. Of course, I'm not saying that psychopaths, sociopaths, and some people with psychotic disorders are perfect or nice and they don't commit crimes. Yet the idea that you would want to tarnish an entire clinical population with the same brush and say all of them are bad, people that are going to commit crimes and hurt people, is disgusting. Anyway, that's that rant over, and me jumping on my soapbox, because I hate this idea and it's just such rubbish. What's the truth? Let's now look into what clinical psychologists actually deal with and the amazing people that they help. So, in reality, clinical psychologists help and they deal with anyone who has a mental health difficulty or mental health condition. Some examples of these mental health difficulties or conditions can include suicidal idealization, depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, or disordered eating, to be honest. trauma survivors with a post-traumatic stress disorder is another possible group too. As we can already see, clinical psychologists deal with a lot of different conditions and people, and some of them are really normal. For example, neurodivergence like ADHD and autism, and clinical psychologists can also deal with learning disabilities too. And it is this really wide range of people who you will get to deal with and you will get to help that makes me love psychology and really makes me love clinical psychology even more because you can do so much with it. Since at the time of writing in February 2024 so far, I've had two major bits of psychology work experience, and I've done lots of different bits and pieces on the side. I've worked with people with learning disability, and that was a quite wide ranging. And if you go and check out the backlist of the Psychology World podcast, you can actually find the episode I wrote about my experience. And I've also worked with transgender individuals at a gender identity clinic, which I really loved. So, as you can see here, just from those really two simple examples, I've worked with such different people with different needs, mental health difficulties, and they were in very different situations. And then a final example, before I start making my point about the truth behind this myth, is that I've spoken a lot about this on the podcast, and I do have a memoir, and it might be out by the time that this book's released. Stepping away from the article, it's not. It should be this year. Well, this year, because I've got quite a few memoirish plus non-fiction psychology information books that are coming out to do with like different bits and pieces. But I've also been through some trauma and abuse, and I went for mental health support in the form of person-centered counselling. And the very idea that I'm crazy, I mess up, and I have a problem just because I needed some counselling, I think it's very disgusting, to be honest. Not so much hurtful, because I've heard it all before, but I think the fact that people want to judge me for what I went through and how I dealt with it is beyond disgusting, and I just don't understand it. Like the very idea that someone says I'm bad for what other people did to me and how other people traumatized me and how others abused me, I think is laughable. Due to you can tell that these people who are saying these things just don't understand what it's like to go through certain stuff. And part of me was smiling as I was reading that paragraph because as you know, I wrote this in February 2024. I was writing April 2024. So I was saying all of this, not realizing what was to come literally 2 months later. It's absolutely tragic, and I'm smiling as a coping mechanism. And if you've read any of my books, if you've listened to my podcast, and I hope that you've understood from my tone and how passionate I am in these chapters, I hope that you know that I'm a lovely person. I love helping people, and all I want to do is support our amazing clients in the future when I do become a clinical psychologist. Overall, this serves as a great segue into my point about what is the truth behind this myth. In reality, clinical psychologists deal with normal people with normal mental health difficulties in normal situations, and sometimes extremely abnormal situations like trauma and abuse. Clinical psychologists deal with the people that laugh, that love their families, have children, are sons, mothers, daughters, and children, and may be trans. They are just normal people. These are clients that clinical psychologists have to deal with, like going out with their friends at the weekend, and they might drink. They like having fun with their friends. They watch TV. They might like reading. They might like watching movies, just like you. The only thing that makes all of these people that clinical psychologists have to deal with different from other people is just that they're brave enough, they're courageous enough, and they are amazing enough to admit that they need mental health support to improve their lives, decrease their psychological distress, and give themselves power. To me, that makes them flat out amazing, and I will not have anyone saying that they're crazy or bad or evil people just because of some silly myth. And if my passion in this chapter has offended some belief in yours, then I'm not sorry, but this is a dangerous, annoying myth that I do want to stamp out, because it's not fair on our client. So it isn't just unfair on people like me who have had mental health experiences, and it's just a disgusting myth that society needs to remove. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because it was definitely quite interesting looking back on this chapter that I wrote before I was raped, and there are definitely parallels now, and I still agree with it wholeheartedly. Like, even because of what happened to me last year with my anorexia and my PTSD and everything else that I had to deal with. None of it made me crazy or a bad person. It was just me dealing with stuff how best I possibly could, though. And that happens to all of our clients. So it's a dangerous myth that psychologists only deal with crazy people. And if you know anyone who will enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Myths About Clinical Psychology, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Wiley. So, have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.